Now, a very interesting summer for Chelsea is in full swing at the moment. They've just sold their best player, Eden Hazard, to Real Madrid. They've just lost their manager, Maurizio Sarri, to Juventus and have a transfer ban hanging over them for the next, possibly, 2 transfer windows. Joining us on the line to discuss what could be an interesting few months for the club, and most definitely will be, is Dominic Fifield, the London football correspondent for The Guardian and The Observer. Dominic, you're very welcome to the show. I feel like it'd start off so many podcasts and so many pieces just with the simple question, what's going on at Chelsea now? But it feels like it's an everlasting and evergreen question for them. As I mentioned, Sarri's just gone to Juve, Hazard's gone to Real Madrid, and this transfer ban is hanging over them. But it seems like Frank Lampard is their chosen one to be their next manager. How close are we, do we know, on that deal being done?
Well, it's ongoing. I think Chelsea hopes that it will get sorted this week. I can see it dragging into next week. I suspect Derby County are frantically looking for a replacement as we speak now. It's not an appointment without risk. I guess you could say the same for virtually every appointment that Chelsea have made. But it's a risk for both Frank Lampard and for Chelsea. As you suggested in the intro there, that there's a club. It's a club in a state of flux yet again, with the rather extraordinary circumstances around the transfer ban as well, which will prevent them from adding to their ranks certainly this summer, potentially mid-season as well. And I think part of the attraction of appointing someone like Frank Lampard, and with Jody Morris in tow as well, a former under-18s manager at Chelsea, is obvious that they could work with the youth products that have done well, not least for Frank Lampard on loan at Derby last season, the likes of Tomori and Mason Mount. Whether any of those guys are ready quite yet to make the step up to Premier League level is very much open to debate. The same could be said of Tammy Abraham, who's had another excellent season in the Championship, but whether he would, excels at the same extent in the Premier League remains to be seen. But at least you've got a manager in Frank Lampard who knows those kids, who knows the setup, and potentially will be willing to use those players in the absence of big money signings. And you'd like to think the club would, while appointing him, would have convinced him that they'll offer a bit more patience than they have maybe given to previous incumbents in that role. Bearing in mind that Frank Lampard, in the 11 years he worked under Abramovich as a player, watched 7 managers get sacked. That's quite a big ask to convince him that there will actually be patience. So I suspect Chelsea will still expect to qualify for the Champions League in the next season, so that they may well be reliant upon the deficiencies of Manchester United and, say, Arsenal, keeping those clubs out of the top 4, and the hope that Frank can do a decent job. But it's a difficult situation for any manager to take on, and what perhaps is going for Frank most of all is his appointment will be hugely popular amongst the fan base, a fan base that was horribly divided last season. Throughout Maurizio Sarri's 1 year in charge, there was a real disconnect between match-going supporters and maybe those, I don't want to say armchair fans, but the guys who were maybe internationally supporting Chelsea or didn't attend games so often at Stamford Bridge. And we saw the level of vitriol and poison to which Sarri and his tactics were subjected over the course of that season. I think Lampard would galvanise the place. He'd probably come back with Morris. He might come back with Chris Jones, who's worked there previously. He might come back with Didier Drogba and Claude Makélélé on his coaching staff. Petr Cech is coming in in a technical capacity as well. So it's almost like the band coming back together. It's the guys who were at Chelsea, were mainstays at Chelsea during the pomp of Mourinho's first spell in charge, and some of whom went on to win the Champions League with Chelsea. And I think that would breathe new life into the club and certainly unite the place. But I suppose supporters are only supportive when the team's winning, and the real test will be whether he gets any results.
Yeah, that's the one thing that jumps out at me when you're talking about the band getting back together and a popular face around the club and somebody who put in so many years of great service and a great performer for them. Like, I'm instantly thinking of what's happened to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and his situation at Manchester United, whereby he walked back in the door, everything was hunky-dory for a couple of weeks, he got that result over in Paris, and it looked like, oh God, the good times are back here again. at Old Trafford, and since then it's been a slow canter downhill towards the end of the season for them. With Chelsea, you've got Lampard coming in, as you mentioned there. He saw 7 bosses being sacked during his tenure as a player there. He saw the political games that go on at that club as well, both inside the dressing room and at board level as well. And neither of those things have gone away. Like, it's going to take a special manager to come in and try and steer that ship in the right direction again. Never mind somebody who's had one season under his belt at Derby. And it's quite another when you've got an owner as remote now as Roman Abramovich is, due to a myriad of circumstances in the UK, and not least of which the poisoning situation with the Russians and his inability to get a visa. He says he wants to continue on with the club, and that appears to still be the case, but there's a lot of different threads for Lampard to kind of try and bring together if he does come on board as manager in the next week or so.
Yeah, you're quite right. Absolutely. It's not easy. It's not easy. I mean, he probably enjoys more of a relationship with Abramovich than maybe, well, certainly most of the managers that preceded him, possibly Mourinho obviously being the key different one, Avram Grant potentially as well, but he does have that line of communication to the owner. But yeah, I agree with everything you say. I think on the face of it, Chelsea aren't in a great place. However, last season they got to 3rd place and won the Europa League. They did that with Eden Hazard in the ranks, and we shouldn't underestimate the fact that Eden Hazard won't be there next season, but also that 2 of their brightest young players, Callum Hudson-Odoi and Ruben Loftus-Cheek, probably won't be around this year either, this calendar year, just because of the Achilles tendon injuries that they picked up towards the end of the last campaign. So look, these problems are mounting. They're everywhere. And you're right too about a distant owner, an owner that, you know, the fact that he attended the friendly in Boston when Ruben Loftus-Cheek actually ruptured his Achilles in May, and then the Europa League final in Baku. It was exceptional to see him at those 2 games, because we hadn't seen him really since 2017 at Chelsea fixtures. So it is, in some ways, it's a different beast. I mean, we haven't got Abramovich, turning up at Cobham to berate the manager when results are on a downturn, but we also haven't got Abramovich's billions to lift Chelsea out of a malaise, because he won't be able to spend any money. So that's why it's a risk for Frank Lampard as well. But to be honest with you, if Lampard finished outside the top 4 and was sacked at Chelsea this time next year, is his reputation going to suffer that much as a manager? Probably not. Probably not, because everybody will look at it and think, well, it's an impossible job there. And everybody gets sacked at Chelsea. I mean, literally everybody gets sacked at Chelsea. So I think he would still have the capabilities to go and get himself another good job. And I also think that he would back himself to do a good job while he's there. It may be that Chelsea can't entice anyone else. I mean, why would Max Allegri want to go to Chelsea when they can't spend any money? They can't replace Hazard. The club has spent the last 3 months insisting that Christian Pulisic has not been bought as a replacement for Eden Hazard. Well, you know, they can't simply turn around and say, well, hold on, we've got Christian Pulisic to come in to fill the void. It's just not going to happen. I think that it's a hard sell to get Chelsea to anyone, really, other than Frank Lampard, because I think Lampard would, at any stage, whatever the state of Chelsea, I think he would find it difficult to turn down the chance to manage them.
What's the general opinion of the season that Lampard has just had at Derby? Because at times it looked like automatic promotion might have been within their view. Then they, really had to battle to get a playoff place in the end, and then the playoff final I don't think really turned up to a degree against Aston Villa. There's been definite causes for concern in terms of how Lampard said about at least parts of the season just gone in the Championship. Is he viewed as being able to take that step up into the Premier League, regardless of the squad that Chelsea have or might not have at their disposal?
It's hard to judge, really, on that. We all know the Championship is a fairly brutal division as well. So many clubs, 10, 11 clubs in contention for promotion. He started very well, tailed off badly in February time this year, picked up again towards the end in a sort of, as a lot of clubs stuttered, got into the playoff places, and then I don't know, their entire playoff campaign seemed to be encapsulated in those 2 titanic games against Leeds United in the semi-finals. They looked a team rather bereft of energy in the final to a certain extent. But that's pretty much what the best managers that Derby have managed in recent seasons. There are very few that have threatened to do better than that. And he was reliant upon a lot of young, I mean, we're talking Harry Wilson as well as Mason Mount and Fikayo Tomori, a lot of young low knees who were finding their way in the game, the professional game, and that was their sort of first opportunity to get regular first-team football. So I don't think he did a bad job at all. I think he was. I think if you test the water with Derby County supporters, they are very loath to lose him this summer, which suggests to me that he is liked and has done a good job galvanising that club. But I do think that Chelsea's a massive step up. I think it's almost incomparable. And when he goes to Chelsea, for all that he will have learnt a lot over the 12 months at Derby, the task that awaits him back at Stamford Bridge is, immeasurably bigger than anything he had over at Pride Park.
I guess the transfer ban, the circumstances surrounding the club at the moment are going to buy him a great deal of forgiveness from the fans, especially heading into the start of next season. But just on that transfer ban, I know Chelsea have appealed to CAS. You mentioned there that almost certainly for this summer they won't be able to buy any players. Do we know the status of that appeal? Do we know how much of a leg that appeal has to stand on at the moment, Dominic?
Well, look, Chelsea opted against appealing for the current ban to be frozen, which has prompted a bit of digging. The suggestion that at best they're hoping that this 2-window ban might get reduced to 1, which will allow them to trade in January. You have to. If you take the club's word, they insist they haven't done anything wrong. If you listen to FIFA and you talk to people who have seen the case and have made that case, it would appear unlikely that CAS would reduce the ban to 1 window. So I think, on legal advice, Chelsea opted against appealing it. And it's almost like they brought in Pulisic. There was still talk they might have the option on Higuain, and they might have the option on to bring in Kovacic. I suspect that the new manager would look at both those options and decline them ultimately. They've got 42 loan players coming back to Stamford Bridge, and a few of those, your Kurt Zumas, the young guys that we mentioned earlier, I suppose possibly someone like Michy Batshuayi possibly might make an impact, as Bakayoko from Milan as well as coming back. People like Danny Drinkwater might even get a look in next year. You never know. It's not that outlandish. And I think that's what they'll operate with. It's almost like they're treating the signing of Pulisic and the return of those low knees as their summer window business. And I guess if you talk about 40 odd players, the calibre of them, that's probably 200-300 million pounds worth of talent in modern window. In modern transfer market, it's just whether any of them are actually good enough to make an impact at an elite club, a club that expects to be finishing in the top 4. I
guess, like when Sarri was appointed last year, or at least before he was appointed, there was talk that Chelsea wanted to, have a new culture at the club, that they didn't want to get into the short-termism, like they've been ultimately forced into it to a degree by Sarri departing, possibly of circumstances of their own making as well. But regardless of that, this is an opportunity for them to actually, if they do get Lampard on board, if he has, bare clay to work with, there is a chance for them to actually instill that quote-unquote culture that they've longed for there for so long.
Have they longed for it?
I think Chelsea fans have. I think the short-termism of it is probably grated on them to a degree.
I agree that an element of the supporters would like a bit of longevity. Well, that said, pretty much every single manager they've had under Abramovich has walked away with silverware of some kind, and it doesn't appear to have, hurt the club particularly. But certainly, if you compare it to the period before Abramovich turned up, you're right. Yeah, there's a possibility. Frank Lampard, you look at him; he's a coach that clearly has scope to develop, to learn his trade, and I think he will, as you said earlier, I think he will have time as far as the supporters are concerned to do that. The biggest, the nagging doubt in my mind is what happens if, come late November, Chelsea are 12th or 14th, even 10th. What do they do then? If they're falling hopelessly behind a somehow rejuvenated Manchester United or somehow rejuvenated Arsenal in the pursuit of a top four place, and the other clubs haven't really slipped up at all. Well, that'll be when the sort of test comes as to whether they actually have proper faith in a long-term project and whether they're willing to write off the year of the 2-window transfer ban. And to be honest with you, every time that's happened, it hasn't happened very often at Chelsea. I mean, the Mourinho was the big one back in late 2015. When that does happen, the reality is the axe is wielded. That's the way Chelsea go. Whenever that club is threatened with not making the top four, the manager walks first.
We started with questions in the air, and I guess we finished with them as well. Dominic Fifield from The Guardian, thanks so much for joining us.